Sorry about that. All right, welcome everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure being here at the Sustainability Conclave. And throughout the day, we've had some really wonderful conversations regarding sustainability, some of the solutions, including young innovators that we just saw now. But one of the most interesting things about this conversation and the pattern that I observed was when we start talking about sustainability, we immediately start talking about policy, about infrastructure, about ground solutions, but not much of a conversation is centered around creating a culture. And when you create a culture, you also end up creating a lasting impact. And that exactly is the essence of this conversation, creating a culture of sustainability. Let me start with the gentleman right next to me, Mr. Govind. Let's assume it's 2035. We're talking a lot about sustainability now. Let's assume it's 2035. As our theme also says, we've already created a culture of sustainability. What will it mean for a common man? Yes, it will help companies reach their ESG goals. It will help some of the brands also sell a lot more sustainable products. But for a common man, once you create a culture of sustainability in this country, what does it mean?
Thank you and good afternoon to all of you. I think that's a wonderful question put across. What does it really mean when it comes to being sustainable, feeling that sustainability is around us? I think that's what the key word is. I think to begin with, I can say that we come from a country where we've had the ethos of sustainability ingrained in us. Right? Very often we end up saying that the very DNA of the country has sustainability inside us. So therefore, it is something that we relate to. It's something that we all understand. But to think that what does it mean when we say we are sustainable, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that it must go beyond just compliance, right? It shouldn't be that, companies are doing things because they have to do what they have to do with respect to environmental compliance, that people are just following and, doing what needs to be done because the law says so and so forth. I think a culture of sustainability would entail a system of, corporate governance, a system of citizens, kind of governing themselves, with systems with, kind of thinking, that sustainability is not something out there, sustainability is not something that has to be done, but our very own actions should entail sustainability. So I think a system of governance, a system of corporate performance where we are looking at making environment the mainstay and not just that environment is something which we have to comply to. I think that's the key step when it comes to mind when we say what culture of sustainability will be all about.
All right. A quick follow-up question there. You have, of course, been involved with the entire movement for a while now. I think it was 2007 when you started Delhi Greens, one of the first digital initiatives to get young participants towards environmental activism, if I may call it. Now, when you look at it, how has the journey been towards training youngsters to actually come out on the streets? You've been in a phase where you used to protest against cutting off trees on campuses. Now you've, of course, been part of larger movements as well. So how difficult is it to get young people on the streets for an issue like environment?
So when we began, some 18 years ago, right, environment was still something in the country we were not talking about much, right? Today, that has changed significantly. We've seen, young people today are much better informed. They know, that environment is not something which is, again, something that they have to just think about, but they breathe and they live the environment, right? That knowledge has, I think, percolated. And of course, there are many factors that have, resulted in doing this. One, I think some of you may already be aware, the Supreme Court has, a good role to play. 30 years ago, I think, they had a, decision that all young people must be taught about environment in schools and colleges, right? And at that point in time, some people contested saying, what has the Supreme Court got to do with environment? Why, kind of talk about, teaching education in the Supreme Court? But today we know what they did has brought justice to the country, right? Which is what their job is. So they've actually empowered young people by explaining them through education, what is the environmental crisis all about? And more importantly, what solutions exist that they can, adopt and implement at their end. So I think that's one big change that I've seen over the last 18 years of working. Thanks to, like I said, education being mainstream with respect to environmental education. That's something that's contributed to that. But also, I think, as we've developed, as we've, kind of worked, as we've progressed, we've, to add this concept here, we've always, in the beginning, seen environment opposed to development, right? That's been a thought process in the country. We've always wondered why this happened. Perhaps it's a colonial mindset, that when you develop, you are taking away from the country, etc. That change we are seeing now has happened, where people have learned that environment is part of development, right? That young people today, I think, have understood that development without environment really does not mean anything. So that's also a positive change we've seen.
Right. And anyone who's used the internet in India has come across Dhimant's website, portal, The Better India. I mean, the repository of stories that you have, the change makers that you put spotlight on. And, I love behavioral science. And one of the things that I have read somewhere is the fact that when you continue focusing on positive stories, it tends to create more civic participation and tends to actually lead towards sustainable solutions than actually putting across stories that create anxiety or create fear mongering. How important is it in your experience, because you've been in this for so long, creating stories, individual stories, highlighting them in a manner that it actually goes beyond just being an individual impact story and into a broader movement?
Thanks, firstly, for having me here. For the last 15 odd years of covering stories at the Better India, I think one thing has really stood out for me, which is that people copy behaviors, People don't copy a government manual. So if there's a policy on environment, people don't sit and follow that and execute. But if they see that the neighbor has put in a solar panel and has cut down her bill by 50%, it's a great incentive. People start copying. So if you ask me, sustainability isn't really an environmental problem, but it's more a cultural thing. And the way we kind of should try and solve it is through showcasing as many success stories around sustainability as possible, keeping in mind that people don't become sustainable because we preach about it, but people become sustainable because there is economic benefit that leads to living more sustainably. What does that mean? It means that if you figured out rainwater harvesting in your apartment complex, you are having a steady supply of water all year round. Not because you want to save the planet, but you say, hey, look, it makes my life easier. You get off the grid because you get to install solar panels. You do waste segregation because you have cleaner neighborhoods, all of that stuff. How does someone even envisage that these are the benefits? And to me, I think that's when the power of stories comes in. If I'm able to consistently keep showcasing that there are huge success stories of people living sustainably and benefiting from it, and here's how you can do it. And that's the part that's very important, right? At the Better India, we've always focused on how an ordinary citizen that you can relate to, if they are able to do it, why can't you do it? Firm believer in the fact that it will be stories that will change behavior.
Right. So just building on that, because it's a very interesting point you made, that the more you focus on, and again, like I said, the behavioral science, the more you focus on positive stories, the more likely do we see positive results as well. And speaking about that, let me go across to Prachi as well. Prachi, everyone talks about global warming, but that's the problem. Your app is called Cool the Globe. And right there, you're talking about the solution. You're not talking about the problem. Just help me understand the work you do with the app. How's your experience been? And what is your motivation that went into creating it?
Absolutely. So, like you rightly asked, we keep hearing about climate change. As a young girl, I wanted to have a career that was making some kind of a difference. And I remember doing a Google search on what is the biggest problem in the world right now, and global warming and climate change popped up. And I remember being surprised because scientists, organizations, people around the world were talking about how climate change is the biggest issue in front of us. Nobody around me was really talking about it. So as I read more about it and the role I played in it, it bothered me. And I remember going to my father and asking him, what can an ordinary girl like me do about a big problem like climate change? It seemed too overwhelming. So we decided to start from our own home. We took a challenge that year to reduce our carbon footprint by 10%. But how? Which activities of mine are leading to most emissions? How do I reduce them? So I started reading up on that, started taking a few simple actions at home. We put up a solar panel, started recycling. Then I realized that if I had to continue on this journey, I needed to be able to measure the impact of my actions. Just the way we track the calories in our food, can I know the emissions behind my actions and the emissions I'm saving with my sustainable actions? So we started tracking that. Now, as soon as we started doing that, something very interesting happened, which is that I started having fun. We began to enjoy it. It felt like a fun game we were playing at home, and it felt good that at least at my own level, I was doing something. And maybe because I was enjoying it so much, my friends, neighbors, people around me started to take notice, and they would come to me and they'd ask, "You're doing something interesting and we'd like to join you in this challenge." And that's when I started thinking, how can I take this individual quest I've taken to solve climate change at my own level and get global citizens to join me on it? From this Cool the Globe app was born. So I started building it from my dorm room. And when we first built it, I remember my mother teasing me that only you and your father are going to be the two users of this app, because who wants to make changes in their own behavior for global warming? But when we started throwing out our sustainable challenges and campaigns, we were very surprised to know that, like you said, people liked being a part of the solution. People do want to do something, we just don't know what. So we would see that people would come on the app, record a climate action that makes sense in their life, like a 9-year-old girl who asked me, what change can I make in my life to fight climate change? So she started going to a school on a cycle and recorded saving 60 kilograms of carbon emissions by doing that, which was 3 times her weight. Another 80-year-old woman called me and said, I can't move around much. It's not like I can walk or take public transport, but I still want to be a part of the solution. So her granddaughter was getting married, and for the wedding, instead of buying her own new clothes, she decided to reuse her own sari from her wedding, recorded saving 15 kilograms of emissions by doing that. So we saw how one action inspired 10 others and created a ripple effect. Now it's been 7 years to that. We have reached over 25 million people, and we have users from 150 countries being a part of the solution and fighting climate change in their own lives on Cool the Globe app.
That's a brilliant point you made, that the fact of that, we've always been a sustainable society. The reusing of sari was a brilliant example. And Dr. Govind, traditionally as well, like I said, we've always been a sustainable society, but there seems to be a weird obsession with conferring to Western standards, Western frameworks when it comes to sustainability. Maybe they work in Europe, maybe they work in America, doesn't mean they have to work in India. And maybe that also doesn't mean that people are not able to relate to it and they're not able to adopt to it in India. Do you think we need to go back and come up with better frameworks that suit our agenda and our society better?
Well, I think you used a good phrase, go back. So I think it's time we do that. Go back not because we must go back to the past, etc., for the sake of it, but go back because the past has some good, useful lessons that we need to bring forward. And I think I agree. A good part of our governance for a long time has, of course, been in the colonial mindset, something that we need to get away from, something that we need to, think about with respect to what sustainability really means. So India has been sustainable long before even the word sustainability was coined, right? That's something we have to keep in mind. We've had the father of a nation who talked about, what is it when it comes to, having a good life. And he says, be the change you wish to see in the world. But he also reminded us, that a simple living, is basically what really sustainability is all about, and also about good living. That's all related. So from that perspective, I think we've had the roots of sustainability ingrained into us, but it's time that we bring those aspects forward. And like I said, not because for the sake of it, but because it's needed now for us to, if we want to really protect our rivers, if we really want to protect, our landscapes, our animals, our biodiversity and wildlife, we need to go back into the connections that once existed that we are losing very soon. If you pick up just the Vedas, for example, they highlight again and again one simple message which says, Jio or Jeene do, right? Live yourself a good life, but also let others live a good life as well. And when it says Jeene do, it's not just talking about other human beings, but also about animals, also about plants, also about rivers. So I think that is something we need to now, go back to. I mean, that's the phrase that you mentioned. And bring it forward and see how sustainability is something that India can teach to the world and not the other way around. I think that's something very important.
Right. And of course, we're talking about culture of sustainability here. How do you define culture? Culture, Dhimant, is essentially behaviors or habits that you keep repeating again and again. As a society, we all adopt it and it becomes a culture. In India, in your experience, what's the sort of behavior or habit do we need to fundamentally work on, and how important is the role of media, let's say a portal like The Better India, in making sure that we break down these habits and we actually move towards a sustainable future?
I think what I'll start with is, for too long, conversation around climate and environment has been led from a guilt lens perspective, guilt tripping people saying the planet is getting warmer, you need to stop using plastics. The planet is getting dirtier, you need to stop, traveling. I think the moment we do that, and the moment we kind of keep barraging people with a doomsday scenario coming in, kind of eventually switches off people, right? It's very normal. You just tune out, which is what happens when you read newspapers and you see all of the stuff that's there. Eventually, you kind of become numb, which is why I think in climate, in sustainability, the conversations should lead with solutions. That's one big part. Culture happens when you see people wanting to come forward to adopt, and that want to adopt will come in if we are showing solutions, we're showing the way for people to kind of come forward. The second thing is, like I said earlier, tying it all up to economic or social benefits is an important aspect for any culture. People don't do it because it's the norm or someone has mandated to do it. No, we can draft the best of policies, but if it is not something that is suitable to the population, nobody's going to kind of use it. I mean, I think we have some of the best policies in the world when it comes to traffic violations. If you look at the number of laws we have, the enforcement and the way people kind of go about it, the incentives are not there. So how do we ensure, for instance, right? Like, how do we bring out the fact that implementing any of these things is actually economically benefiting you? The more we start working on building those aspects.
Just to interrupt you there, Dhimant, there's an interesting paradox about climate crisis. Those with the fewest resources, those who are on the lower strata of the society, actually have the least contribution to climate crisis. And eventually, at the end of the day, they're the biggest sufferers of it. So there needs to be a conversation. We talk about climate action. We talk about climate crisis. We also need to talk about climate justice. How do we bring about that?
So, yeah, I mean, that's if you talk about that, I don't think it's related to climate alone. If you just look at taxes, the biggest burden is borne by the lower strata of society. You pay 18% GST on that pack of biscuit, and even that person pays 18% GST on that pack of biscuit. And that 18% is a larger share of his or her income than it is for you. So I think that remains as a systemic challenge on how do you kind of solve it. And it's going to be harder to first solve it at an economic level and then move on to the sort of the climate level, especially considering where India is as a low-income economy, and we are still on the phase of moving ahead. So I do think that is a larger question for us to sort of solve for before we even move to the climate question there.
Absolutely. And Prachi, you yourself are a UNICEF climate advocate. Beyond protests and beyond awareness campaigns, where do you think young Indians, like we, for example, saw innovators here, where do you think young Indians are making the most impact when it comes to climate solutions?
I mean, I've been in climate for about 10 years now, and I've spoken with all kinds of stakeholders, from policymakers to scientists to ministers. And having done that, today I believe that of all the stakeholders in this space, young people are perhaps the most important ones. And what's even more important than young people is that we all become a little young when we look at sustainability. So we've been talking a bit about creating a culture of sustainability. And I want to bring a little bit of, since you asked about youth, I want to bring a little bit of young energy to that. So I want to do that by doing a small experiment with all of you. And I want to create a culture of sustainability right here in this room today. And we're going to do that by being a little energetic about the climate actions we take. So you have to do a little something with me over the next minute. You're going to be a part of that experiment with me. We're going to create a culture of sustainability in this room right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start taking names of sustainable actions. And if you've taken that action this month, all you have to do is stand up with me. Okay? Ready? Give me a thumbs up if you're ready to do this. Okay, perfect. So if you have traveled by public transport this week or this month, then please stand up and keep standing. If you have segregated waste this month, then stand up and keep standing. If you've carried your own water bottle, then stand up and please keep standing. If you have recycled plastic this month, then stand up and keep standing. If you have made sustainability a part of your work, then stand up and keep standing. If you took notes digitally today, then stand up and keep standing. If you've taken a sustainable takeaway from this event together, then stand up. Okay, perfect. So we have the entire room standing up. All of us are here today standing up for sustainability. Keep standing. Now all I want you to do is give the person next to you a hug and tell them, I'm proud of you for the sustainable action you've taken. Just give the person next to you a nice hug and say, I'm proud of you for the action you took. Amazing. So this is the culture of sustainability, and this is the youth and energy we need to bring to it. The role we play is that in the rooms that sustainability is spoken about, yes, now you can sit. In the rooms we speak about sustainability, it's always boring and you always see a few people dozing off. We need to change that by bringing a bit of young energy and zeal to this environment where sustainability is not boring anymore. It's something fun and energetic we do together.
Absolutely. I mean, it definitely was fun and energetic, but the problem, Doctor, is the fact that when we talk about sustainability or climate action, the conversation usually is very negative, like Dhimant pointed out. They talk about dharti khatam ho jayegi, ye ho jayega, wo. So it's a very negative tone that we attach to it. And in a way, do you think that is something that keeps youngsters a little far away from these conversations? It just adds that undertone of despair, anxiety to the whole conversation around climate action. And if we need to make a change, like she just did right now, everyone's just suddenly much more awake. Do we need to add that extra layer to get in youngsters to participate more actively towards climate action?
Well, certainly, I think this was an excellent attempt at, reawakening the crowd, certainly very much required. At that same, in the same thought process, I think environment is something which is a very lively, kind of a discipline or a subject or a thing that we talk about. Climate change is about, the earth itself. And the earth is full of energy. We all know that, right? So therefore, to talk about these issues in a mundane tone, etc., is not going to help the cause for sure. That I can say for sure. So I think that's a very well put exercise to remind us that this is what environment is all about. It's really something which is lively. It includes wildlife. It includes trees, running, gushing rivers, and whatnot. To talk about the aspect with respect to the now emerging sometimes questioned field of eco-anxiety, is that something that young people are facing? To some extent, yes, but I think that's because we're not teaching them the solutions that exist. We are focusing more on the problem, which is an approach that needs to change. There are now myriad of solutions to overcome the challenges we are facing. Right? It's just that they're not being adopted, they're not being promoted. But if you just do a simple Google search, if you just talk to people, even talk to ChatGPT for that matter, and just say, give me a list of environmental sustainability climate solutions, you'll find lots and lots of them. Right? The list just goes on and on. So therefore, I think it's not really something that we need to be worried about with respect to the fact that there is a doomsday scenario. What we must worry for sure, which is something we tell young people, is that not many people are adopting these solutions. The governments are often not looking in the solutions way. That is something that needs to be done for sure. Something to quickly conclude on, I also often share with students, interns, all the people who come, saying, it's not the world or the earth which is in trouble, right? The earth is very happily doing what it's doing. It'll just, shake off once and shake off the human species if we become very, troublesome for them. It's the human beings which are in trouble. It's us who are in trouble. So therefore, what we are doing is basically to, save human beings and not so much to save the planet. So therefore, I think that is the message when we, get across to people. It really kind of gets home the message that A, we need to definitely do something about, our own carbon footprint, ecological footprint, and B, solutions exist. They're out there. They just need to be adopted. Of course, young people need to, be more vocal about them, find them, tell the governments that this is what we want, because that's the approach that needs to be taken into. And again, like I said, it's something we have also, always highlighted, that it's a country where we call rivers sacred. We go and bow our heads to rivers, to trees, to animals, right? And therefore, the culture of sustainability is very much, here. It just needs something we need to go back to our own roots and remind ourselves of what we need to do to, just protecting the environment once again.
All right, I can squeeze in a minute and a half more in the conversation. Before we wrap, quick word from all three of you on one thing all our listeners today can take home with them, one habit that they can change, which will eventually create a culture of sustainability. Starting with you, Dhimant.
I think I would say, lead with an optimistic lens. There's a lot of solutions around that we have here. Very quickly, the water that you guys see here, right, which is actually coming in from atmospheric air. And what I learned when I dug in deeper is that the amount of fresh water in the atmosphere is 6 times more than the fresh water available in all the rivers of the world. Great, right? That we have a solution. We have that, and that's the sort of lens that I want you all to kind of see, that it's not doomsday that we're running out of all water, but then we've figured out a way to do this.
All right, so I won't complain about humidity the next time. Prachi?
I mean, since we have a room full of senior leaders, I think I would say we need to stop looking at sustainability as a responsibility and look at it as an opportunity. And then the second thing we need to change is we need to show off more. You know, we need to show off the sustainable actions we're already taking and the work you're already doing. And we'd realize that when we tell it to 10 people, they tell it to 10 more, and our action inspires others and creates a ripple effect for even the larger systemic changes that are needed. So just show off for climate action.
Doctor?
Right. So at Delhi Greens, we carried out research to find out that if every human being plants 7 trees in their lifetime and makes sure they become trees, right, you've balanced your life. You've balanced your ecological footprint, your carbon footprint. So I'll encourage all of you to plant 7 trees in your lifetime. Make sure you planted those trees. Of course, you can plant many more, but minimum 7, and ensure they go on to become big trees as well.
All right, thank you everyone. A big round of applause here for all our panelists. Creating a culture of sustainability, that was the conversation. I think we have started doing that a little bit through this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.